Welcome to Life Stories, where we share tales of love, resilience, and the human spirit's ability to overcome life's challenges. In today's story, we meet Emily Harper, a dedicated school nurse and single mother fighting for custody of her beloved son, Ethan. Amid the turmoil of a difficult divorce and mounting struggles, an unexpected encounter with a kind stranger changes the course of her life. As Emily navigates heartbreak, hope, and new beginnings, she discovers the strength within herself to embrace a brighter future. Subscribe to Life Stories and join us as we begin today's heartfelt journey. The morning was a familiar mix of chaos and quiet as the sun rose over the city of Chicago. Emily Harper, a school nurse, sat in her modest kitchen, staring at her lukewarm coffee. She was about to face the final unraveling of her 8-year marriage. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, each second pulling her closer to the courtroom where the remnants of her life with Jacob would officially dissolve. A faint beam of light filtered through the window blinds, casting playful lines on the walls. But Emily felt no joy in their dance. Her mind swirled with memories, some good, many painful, as she made her way to the school for what was meant to be a brief stop before heading to court. The air inside the school office felt heavy, a reflection of her own burden. Principal Brenda Stevenson, a no-nonsense woman with sharp features and auburn hair pulled into a tight bun, greeted her with a curt, "So, you need time off?" The question, though blunt, was not unkind. But Emily felt her throat tighten as she tried to explain. "I need to be in court by 11, she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's my divorce hearing." Brenda's face softened for a moment before regaining its typical stern composure. "Emily, I've always admired your strength. This can't be easy. But remember, personal life comes first," she said, the words accompanied by a hint of genuine concern. Emily nodded, a weak smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Strength. It seemed like everyone saw her that way, a fortress of resilience. But inside, she felt anything but strong. Her heart was a tangle of emotions, fear, sadness, and an ache that threatened to consume her. As Brenda continued with a list of tasks and upcoming reports, Emily's thoughts drifted. Her mind was already at the courthouse, imagining the sharp words and cold gazes that awaited her. She nodded absently to Brenda's instructions, murmuring agreements she didn't fully hear. When she finally left the office, a wave of relief washed over her. She stepped out into the schoolyard, the sunlight warm on her skin, and took a deep breath. It was a small reprieve, but her heart remained heavy. The day ahead loomed like a dark cloud on the horizon. At the bus stop, Emily was jolted from her thoughts by a commotion nearby. A man stumbled, swayed, and collapsed onto the pavement. The world around her seemed to blur as she ran toward him, instincts as a nurse kicking in. His clothes were worn and unkempt, his face flushed with heat. Emily knelt beside him, her hand brushing his forehead, which burned like fire. "Can you hear me? Are you okay?" she asked urgently. But there was no response. The group of teenagers nearby giggled and snapped selfies, oblivious to the scene unfolding just a few feet away. Frustration flared within Emily, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the man before her. He was breathing shallowly, his chest rising and falling with difficulty. Her heart pounded as she dialed 911. "This is Emily Harper. I'm at Westview Elementary. There's a man unconscious here. He's in critical condition," she reported, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "We'll dispatch paramedics right away," the operator assured her. Time seemed to stretch as she waited, her mind racing through the steps of first aid training. The man's breathing faltered, and panic surged through her veins. Without hesitation, she positioned her hands over his chest and began compressions. "Come on. Stay with me," she murmured, her voice a mixture of desperation and determination. Her surroundings melted away, the curious stares, the sound of her own labored breathing, all of it faded as she focused on the rhythm of her compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. Over and over. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she fought to keep the man's lifeline intact. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the man's eyelids fluttered, and he drew in a shaky breath. Relief cascaded over Emily, her own breath catching in her throat as tears pricked her eyes. "He's alive," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. The paramedics arrived moments later, their efficiency a balm to her frayed nerves. She stepped back as they took over, watching as they loaded the man onto a stretcher. Her hands shook, adrenaline still coursing through her. "You did well," one of the medics said, offering her a reassuring nod. Emily managed a faint smile. It wasn't her first time saving a life, but something about this moment felt profoundly different. As she watched the ambulance disappear around the corner, she realized she'd forgotten the court entirely. Her heart sank as she glanced at her watch, 11:17. The hearing had already started. Guilt and dread threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced herself to move. She boarded the next bus. The ride to the courthouse filled with the weight of what she had just experienced and the knowledge that she was catastrophically late. When she finally arrived, the courthouse doors loomed before her, heavy and foreboding. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the handle. Could she face what waited inside? Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open and stepped into the cavernous room. The scene was as tense as she had imagined. Jacob sat on one side of the table, his expression cold and calculating. Beside him was Ashley, her painted smile gleaming with satisfaction. The judge glanced up, displeased by her tardiness, but allowed the proceedings to continue. Emily's lawyer, Arnold Taylor, stood beside her, his presence a small comfort in the storm of emotions. As the hearing progressed, Emily found herself bombarded by accusations from Jacob's lawyer, arguments designed to paint her as unfit, as weak. But she refused to break. For every attack, she responded with quiet strength, her voice steady even as her heart ached. By the end of the session, the judge's decision was clear: Jacob would retain custody of Ethan, and the division of property was denied due to a lack of evidence. Emily's world crumbled in that moment. But she held her head high. She would not let Jacob or anyone else see her despair. As she left the courthouse, the weight of the day threatened to crush her. She walked aimlessly through the streets of Chicago, the bustling city a stark contrast to the emptiness she felt inside. The warmth of the morning sun had given way to a chilly breeze, and the people around her moved with purpose, their lives seemingly untouched by the kind of heartbreak she carried. When she finally returned home that evening, Emily collapsed onto her couch, the events of the day replaying in her mind. She thought of the man she had saved and the lives she couldn't save, her marriage, her family as she had once known it. But as her thoughts drifted to Ethan, she felt a flicker of hope. For him, she would keep fighting. For him, she would find a way to rebuild. Tomorrow would come, and with it, new challenges. But for tonight, Emily allowed herself to feel every emotion, to grieve what was lost and to gather the strength for what lay ahead. The next morning, Emily Harper woke to the soft rays of sunlight filtering through her bedroom window. The warmth on her face felt almost deceptive, a stark contrast to the cold reality that had settled in her chest. The previous day's events weighed heavily on her: the bitter court hearing, losing custody of Ethan, and the life she had tried so hard to hold together unraveling before her eyes. As she stirred her coffee at the kitchen table, Emily's mind wandered back to the man she had saved at the bus stop. His pale face, the weight of his life in her hands, and the adrenaline that coursed through her veins as she worked to revive him. It was an experience she couldn't shake. Saving his life had given her a fleeting sense of purpose amid her personal turmoil. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. The number was unfamiliar, and for a moment, she hesitated. Taking a deep breath, she answered, her voice tentative. "Hello. This is Emily. Emily Harper." "This is Daniel Weston," the man on the other end said. His voice was warm, almost soothing. I hope I'm not disturbing you. I just wanted to thank you personally. You saved my brother, Luke. Yesterday. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Luke. The man on the pavement. She hadn't expected to hear from anyone connected to him, let alone someone speaking with such genuine gratitude. Oh. Yes. I was there, she stammered, unsure of what to say. How is he? He's doing well. Thanks to you. Honestly, I can't express how grateful my family and I are. You didn't just save his life, you gave us back a part of ours. Emily felt a flush of warmth rise in her cheeks. It was rare to receive such heartfelt appreciation for her work. I'm just glad he's okay, she said softly. I'd like to meet you in person to thank you properly. Daniel continued. If that's all right with you. Emily hesitated. The idea of meeting a stranger, even one expressing gratitude, felt daunting. Her instinct was to politely decline, to retreat into the safety of her routine. But something about his voice, the sincerity in his words, made her pause. All right, she said finally, but nothing too formal. Of course, Daniel said, his tone lightening. How about dinner tomorrow evening? There's a lovely little cafe downtown, it's quiet. Nothing fancy. Emily hesitated again but then relented. Okay. Tomorrow evening works. After ending the call, Emily set the phone down and exhaled deeply. She wasn't sure what had compelled her to agree, but a part of her wondered if this meeting might offer a reprieve from the shadows clouding her life. The day passed in a blur of routine. At the school, Emily tended to the usual scrapes, sniffles, and stomachaches. But her thoughts were never far from Ethan. She saw him in the hallways between classes, his small face brightening when he caught sight of her. Hi. Mom, he called out, running over to give her a quick hug. Hi. Sweetheart, she said, kneeling to his level. How was your morning? We had a science lesson today. It was so cool. Ethan's eyes sparkled as he recounted the experiment they'd done with baking soda and vinegar. Emily smiled, soaking in his excitement. But beneath her joy at seeing him was a gnawing pain. She couldn't shake the thought that soon these moments would be fewer and farther between. She wanted to reassure him, to promise she'd always be there. But how could she, when the court's decision loomed over them like an unyielding shadow? Later that evening, as she prepared for bed, Emily's thoughts returned to the phone call with Daniel. She wondered what he was like. Was he as warm and kind in person as he had seemed over the phone? Or would the dinner be an awkward reminder of how far removed she felt from the normalcy she once knew? When the next evening arrived, Emily found herself standing in front of her wardrobe, agonizing over what to wear. She finally settled on a simple navy dress, something casual but presentable. As she looked in the mirror, she hardly recognized herself. The exhaustion in her eyes, the faint lines of worry on her face, they were remnants of the struggles she'd faced in the past year. The cafe Daniel had mentioned turned out to be charming and inviting, with soft lighting and cozy booths tucked away from the bustling streets of downtown Chicago. When Emily arrived, Daniel was already waiting. He stood as she approached, offering her a warm smile. Emily, he said, extending his hand. It's so nice to meet you. Likewise, she replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm but gentle, and his smile reached his eyes. As they sat down, the conversation flowed more easily than Emily had expected. Daniel was charismatic and attentive, asking her about her work, her interests, and how she had come to be at the bus stop that fateful morning. Emily found herself opening up, sharing stories she hadn't told anyone in years. By the time dessert arrived, Emily realized she was laughing, genuinely laughing, for the first time in what felt like forever. Daniel had a way of making her feel at ease, of momentarily lifting the weight of her worries. As they said their goodbyes outside the cafe, Daniel hesitated, his expression earnest. Thank you again, Emily. Not just for what you did for Luke, but for tonight. It's been a long time since I've enjoyed an evening like this. Me too, Emily admitted. surprising herself with her honesty. Daniel smiled, his eyes holding a warmth that lingered even as he stepped back. "Good night, Emily. I hope we can do this again sometime." "Good night, Daniel," she said softly, watching as he walked away. As Emily made her way home, the streets of Chicago glimmering under the city lights, she felt a strange but welcome sense of hope. It was fragile, like a spark just beginning to catch, but it was there, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that brighter days might still lie ahead. The following days passed in a haze of routine and reflection for Emily Harper. Though her responsibilities as a school nurse filled her days, her mind often wandered back to the dinner with Daniel Weston. She had felt something unfamiliar that evening, a lightness, a reprieve from the heavy cloak of her struggles. And while she wasn't sure what it meant, she couldn't deny the warmth it brought. At school, Emily busied herself tending to children who came in with scraped knees, fevers, and other minor ailments. Her heart found solace in their innocence, especially when she saw her son, Ethan, during his breaks. Every time their eyes met in the bustling hallways, she cherished those fleeting moments, though a pang of sadness always followed. That Friday, as she organized the supplies in the nurse's office, her phone buzzed again. The caller ID read unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Hello," she said cautiously. "Emily. It's Daniel," came the now familiar voice on the other end. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "No, not at all," Emily replied, setting down a bottle of antiseptic. "How are you?" "I'm doing well, thanks," Daniel said. There was a pause, as if he was weighing his next words. "I've been thinking about you since our dinner. I was wondering if you'd like to join me for a walk tomorrow. There's a beautiful park not far from your school." Emily hesitated, unsure if she should agree. Yet, a part of her yearned for the connection she had felt during their first meeting. "That sounds nice," she said finally. "What time? Would noon work for you?" he asked, the smile evident in his voice. "Noon it is," Emily replied, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I'll see you then." The next day, Emily arrived at Riverstone Park, a tranquil oasis on the edge of the city. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves, and the park's pathways were adorned with vibrant reds, oranges, and yellows. Daniel was waiting near a bench, dressed casually in a sweater and jeans. When he saw her, he stood and waved. "Emily," he said warmly, "I'm so glad you could make it." "Hi, Daniel," she replied, a little shyly. "It's a beautiful day." "It is," he agreed, falling into step beside her as they began walking along the winding path. Their conversation flowed easily, much like it had during dinner. Daniel shared stories about his family, particularly about Luke, who was still recovering at home. Emily listened intently, touched by the love and concern in Daniel's voice. "And what about you?" Daniel asked after a while. "You mentioned you have a son. Tell me more about him." Emily's face softened at the mention of Ethan. "His name is Ethan. He's 8 years old, smart, and curious about everything. He's the light of my life." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "He sounds wonderful. Does he know how much you adore him?" "I hope he does," Emily said, her voice tinged with both pride and pain. The court decided he should live with his father, Jacob, after the divorce. "It's been difficult. I'm sorry, Emily," Daniel said sincerely. "That must be incredibly hard." "It is," Emily admitted, her gaze fixed on the path ahead. "But I try to stay strong for him. I want him to know I'll always be there, no matter what." They continued walking, the conversation turning to lighter topics as they admired the park's beauty. Emily felt a growing sense of ease with Daniel, his kindness and empathy shining through with every word. By the time they returned to the park's entrance, she realized she hadn't thought about her troubles for the past hour, a rare gift. "Thank you for today," Emily said as they stopped near her car. I didn't realize how much I needed this. Anytime. Daniel replied, his eyes warm. I meant what I said before. You're remarkable. Emily. She felt her cheeks flush at his words but managed a quiet, thank you. Daniel hesitated before speaking again. I'd like to see you again. If that's okay. Emily hesitated, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. She was still piecing herself together. Her life a patchwork of unresolved pain and hope. But Daniel's presence felt like a steadying force. I'd like that, she said finally, her voice soft. They exchanged goodbyes. And as Emily drove home, the weight in her chest felt a little lighter. She didn't know where this connection with Daniel might lead. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of hope, a fragile yet undeniable sense that life could still hold moments of beauty and joy. That evening, as she sat in her small apartment, Emily opened her journal. The worn pages were a tapestry of her life, memories, thoughts, and hopes poured out in ink. Picking up her pen, she began to write. Dear Journal, today reminded me that even in the hardest times, there are glimmers of light. I don't know where this path will take me, but I'm starting to believe it might be worth following. As she set the journal aside and prepared for bed, Emily felt a sense of calm settle over her. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight, she allowed herself to rest, her heart buoyed by the promise of something new. The days following her walk with Daniel passed quietly, though Emily Harper felt a shift within herself. The weight she carried wasn't gone, but something about her conversations with Daniel brought a glimmer of warmth to her life. His kindness, empathy, and the gentle way he spoke to her reminded her that even amidst turmoil, there was still beauty to be found in connection. At the school, life moved on as usual. Emily's days were filled with tending to students, ensuring the first aid supplies were stocked, and handling the endless minor emergencies that came with working in an elementary school. But her thoughts often drifted to Ethan. Every glance she stole of him in the hallways felt bittersweet, a reminder of the love they shared and the looming distance that court orders threatened to enforce. One afternoon, as she reviewed some medical forms in her office, there was a knock at the door. Looking up, she was surprised to see Principal Brenda Stevenson standing there, her stern expression as sharp as ever. Emily, Brenda began. Stepping inside, a man came by earlier asking for you. Tall, well-dressed, looked like he stepped out of a catalogue. Emily blinked in surprise. A man? Did he give his name? Brenda folded her arms, her lips pressing into a line. He said his name was Daniel Weston. Claimed he wanted to thank you for helping his brother. Very charming. But, Emily prompted, suddenly feeling a flush of nervousness. Brenda raised a brow. Emily, I hope this isn't becoming a habit. The parents and staff see everything, and I don't want to hear any gossip about our school nurse entertaining suitors on school property. Emily felt her cheeks heat. It's nothing like that. Brenda. Daniel's just expressing his gratitude. Well, make sure it stays professional. Brenda said with a pointed look. You have enough on your plate already. As Brenda left the office, Emily let out a slow breath, her thoughts swirling. She appreciated Daniel's thoughtfulness, but his unexpected appearance had caught her off guard. Still, a small part of her couldn't deny the flicker of excitement it brought. Later that evening, Emily sat at her kitchen table, staring at her phone. She debated whether to call Daniel and address the situation or to simply let it go. Before she could make a decision, her phone buzzed. His name lit up the screen. Daniel, she answered, her voice hesitant. Hi. Emily, he said, his tone warm. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. No, it's fine, she replied, fiddling with the edge of her notebook. I heard you stopped by the school today. Daniel chuckled softly. I did. I wanted to thank you again in person. But I didn't realize it might cause a stir. It's a small school, Emily said with a faint smile. People notice things. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. Daniel said, his voice sincere. "I just wanted to see you." The honesty in his words caught her off guard. It had been so long since someone had spoken to her with such openness. She found herself softening despite her initial hesitation. "Thank you," she said after a pause. "That means a lot." There was a brief silence before Daniel spoke again. "Emily, I know you're going through a lot right now, and I don't want to add to your stress. But if you ever need someone to talk to, or just some time to step away from everything, I'm here." His offer lingered in the air, wrapping around her like a safety net. Emily felt her throat tighten with emotion. "That's kind of you, Daniel. I'll keep that in mind." After they ended the call, Emily sat in silence for a while. She couldn't deny that Daniel's presence in her life felt like a balm to her bruised spirit. But she also couldn't ignore the fear creeping in, the fear of letting someone close again, of trusting and being hurt once more. The next day brought an unexpected turn. As Emily walked Ethan to his classroom, he clung to her hand a little tighter than usual. "Mom," he said quietly, his eyes downcast. "I don't want to live with Dad." Emily's heart twisted. She knelt down to meet his gaze, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "I know, sweetheart," she said softly. "I don't want to be apart from you either." "Why can't you tell the court?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. "I want to stay with you." Tears pricked at Emily's eyes, but she held them back. "I'm trying, Ethan. I promise you. I'll do everything I can." He nodded, his small hand gripping hers tightly before the teacher called the students inside. Emily stood there for a moment after he disappeared into the classroom, the ache in her chest heavier than ever. That evening, Emily found herself pouring her heart into her journal. She wrote about Ethan's words, her fears, and the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, things could change. She also wrote about Daniel, her conflicted feelings about his kindness and the tentative connection growing between them. As she set her pen down, Emily gazed out the window, the city lights twinkling in the distance. Her life felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. But for the first time in a long time, she began to believe that those pieces could be found. She just needed the courage to keep searching. The days began to grow cooler as autumn deepened, with Chicago's streets blanketed in vibrant leaves that crunched underfoot. Emily Harper found herself caught between the rhythm of her daily life and the unpredictable emotions that seemed to tug her in every direction. Work at the school was steady, and her brief encounters with Ethan between classes brought her fleeting moments of joy. But the ache of their impending separation loomed like a shadow. One evening, as Emily sat in her small apartment reviewing medical records from school, her phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. "I was wondering if you'd like to join me for a walk this weekend. The lakefront is beautiful this time of year." She stared at the screen, her emotions a mixture of hesitation and curiosity. Since their last conversation, Daniel had been on her mind more than she cared to admit. His genuine kindness and calm demeanor were a welcome contrast to the chaos she felt in her life. She tapped out a reply before she could overthink it. "That sounds nice. Saturday?" When Saturday arrived, the city was bathed in crisp autumn air, and Emily met Daniel near the lakeside promenade. The wind carried the faint scent of water, and the sunlight danced on the rippling waves. Daniel greeted her with a warm smile, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. "Thanks for coming," he said, his tone easy and inviting. "Thanks for inviting me," Emily replied, falling into step beside him as they began their walk. The path was busy with joggers, cyclists, and families enjoying the weekend. But Emily and Daniel's conversation flowed as if they were the only two people there. He shared stories of his family's roots in the Midwest, his younger brother Luke's recovery from his recent health scare, and his passion for working in community development projects. Emily found herself talking about her childhood on her grandparents' farm, how she'd always wanted to be a nurse, and her challenges as a single mother. She even confided in him about her struggles with Ethan's custody battle, a topic she usually avoided with anyone outside her closest circle. "It's hard," she admitted. her voice heavy with emotion. Knowing that someone else gets to decide what's best for your child. Even when you feel it in your bones that he belongs with you. Daniel stopped walking and turned to face her. His eyes steady and full of understanding. You're fighting for him because you love him. That's what matters most. And even if it feels unfair right now, he'll always know how much you care. That can never be taken away. Emily blinked back tears. His words striking a chord deep within her. Thank you, she said. Her voice barely above a whisper. They continued their walk. The sound of waves lapping against the shore providing a soothing backdrop. By the time they reached a small cafe near the pier, Emily realized how much lighter she felt. Over cups of warm cider, their conversation shifted to lighter topics: books, music, even a playful debate about the best pizza in Chicago. Emily found herself laughing. Her worries momentarily set aside. Daniel had a way of making her feel seen. As if she were more than just a nurse, a mother, or a woman going through a difficult divorce. As the sun began to set, casting hues of orange and pink across the lake, Daniel walked Emily back to her car. He hesitated before speaking. His voice soft but earnest. Emily, I really enjoy spending time with you. I know things are complicated in your life right now, but I'd like to get to know you better. If you'll let me. Emily looked up at him, her heart torn between fear and the faint stirrings of hope. I don't know if I'm ready for anything serious, she said honestly. My life feels like it's in pieces right now. Daniel nodded, his expression understanding. I'm not asking for anything more than your time. No expectations. No pressure. Just, let's see where this goes. His words were gentle. And for a moment, Emily allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to have someone like Daniel in her life, steady, kind, and patient. All right, she said finally, a small smile breaking through. Let's see where this goes. The following week, Emily noticed a change in herself. Though her days were still filled with the same challenges, she felt a sense of renewed strength. She began to look forward to her conversations with Daniel. Their texts and calls a bright spot in her routine. But life had a way of reminding her that nothing was simple. One afternoon, as she was preparing to leave the school, she received a call from her lawyer. Arnold. Emily. Arnold said, his tone serious. I've been reviewing the details of your custody case, and I think we may have an opening to request a review. Emily's breath caught. A review? What does that mean? It means we can present new evidence or arguments to challenge the court's decision. Arnold explained. But it won't be easy. Jacob's legal team will fight hard to keep the current ruling in place. The hope that had sparked in her heart threatened to ignite into something brighter. What do we need to do? She asked. Her voice firm. Arnold began outlining the steps they would need to take. But Emily barely heard him. Her mind was already racing, thinking of how much this chance could mean for her and Ethan. That evening, as she sat in her apartment with her journal open on the table, Emily wrote, "Hope is a fragile thing. But it's all I have right now. I'll fight for Ethan with everything I have. No matter how hard it gets. And maybe, just maybe, I'm not fighting alone anymore." She closed the journal, her resolve solidifying like steel. Emily knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for her son, she was willing to face whatever challenges came her way. And, though she couldn't fully understand it yet, she sensed that Daniel's presence in her life was no coincidence. The days following Emily's conversation with her lawyer were a whirlwind of preparation and emotion. Arnold's words had sparked something in her, a renewed sense of purpose. She threw herself into gathering documents, organizing her thoughts, and compiling every piece of evidence that could demonstrate her ability to provide the best home for Ethan. Yet, amid the flurry of activity, her heart remained tethered to the uncertainty of the outcome. Daniel became a steadying presence during this time. He didn't intrude on her work or overwhelm her with advice but offered quiet support, always ready with a comforting word or an attentive ear. Their evening phone calls became a ritual. a space where Emily could exhale and let her guard down. One evening, as she sat on her couch surrounded by stacks of paperwork, Daniel called. "How's it going over there?" he asked, his voice carrying its usual warmth. Emily glanced at the chaos around her and let out a soft laugh. "It's overwhelming. But I'm getting through it." "Good," he said. "I know you'll handle this with the strength and grace you always do." His confidence in her was a lifeline, and she found herself smiling despite the tension. "Thank you, Daniel. That means a lot." "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "I'm just here to remind you of what you already know. You're an incredible mom. And you'll fight for Ethan with everything you have." Hearing those words, Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. She didn't reply right away, afraid her voice might betray the emotion welling up inside her. Instead, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "You always know what to say," she said softly. "That's because I believe in you," Daniel said simply. In the days leading up to the court review, Emily found herself leaning on Daniel more than she had expected. He accompanied her on walks through the park to clear her head, shared quiet dinners where they talked about everything and nothing, and even helped her organize some of the documents for the case. With each passing day, she felt a deeper sense of trust growing between them, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to experience in a long time. On the morning of the court review, Emily stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of her blouse. Her hands trembled slightly, and she closed her eyes, willing herself to be calm. She couldn't afford to falter now, not when so much was at stake. When she arrived at the courthouse, Arnold was waiting for her outside the courtroom. His reassuring presence and measured tone helped ease some of her nerves. But as they stepped inside, the sight of Jacob sitting with his lawyer made her stomach churn. He glanced at her briefly, his expression unreadable, before turning back to his notes. The proceedings began, and Emily felt every word like a weight on her chest. Arnold presented their case with precision, highlighting her role as Ethan's primary caregiver during their marriage and the strong bond she shared with her son. He painted a picture of stability and love, qualities that Emily had fought hard to provide despite the challenges she faced. Jacob's lawyer, on the other hand, focused on the material advantages Jacob could offer: his higher income, his large home, and the resources at his disposal. Emily's modest means were scrutinized, and though she knew this was part of the process, it still felt like an attack on her character. Throughout it all, Emily held her head high, refusing to let Jacob or his lawyer see her break. She answered the judge's questions with honesty and composure, her voice steady even as her heart raced. And when the judge asked her about Ethan's well-being, Emily spoke with a fierce determination that came straight from her soul. "Ethan is my world," she said, her eyes meeting the judge's. "Every decision I make is with his happiness and future in mind. I may not have the wealth that Jacob does, but I have an unwavering love for my son, and I'll do everything in my power to ensure he feels safe, supported, and cherished." The courtroom fell silent for a moment, her words hanging in the air like a challenge to anyone who dared question her devotion. When the proceedings concluded, the judge announced that a decision would be made in the coming weeks. Emily left the courtroom feeling both exhausted and cautiously hopeful. She had done everything she could, and now it was out of her hands. That evening, Daniel came over with takeout and a bottle of wine. They sat on the floor of her living room, surrounded by the remnants of her court preparations, and talked about anything but the case. For a few hours, Emily allowed herself to let go of the weight she carried, finding solace in Daniel's easy presence. "You're incredible. You know that," Daniel said as they finished their meal. Emily looked at him, her cheeks flushing. "I don't always feel that way." "Well, you are," he said firmly, "and Ethan is lucky to have you." His words brought a lump to her throat, and before she could stop herself, she reached out and took his hand. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For everything." Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "You don't have to thank me, Emily. I'm here because I want to be. In that moment, Emily felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of belonging. It was fragile and uncertain, but it was there. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, Emily let herself believe that she wasn't alone in facing them. And that, for now, was enough. As the weeks passed, Emily Harper's life slowly began to fall into place. The court ruled in her favor, granting her primary custody of Ethan. The relief and joy she felt as she held her son tightly were beyond words. Ethan's smile, his arms wrapped around her, reminded her why she had fought so hard. It was all for him. Daniel remained by her side, not just as a supportive presence but as someone who had become deeply intertwined with her and Ethan's lives. His gentle patience and unwavering belief in her had helped Emily find the strength to move forward, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. On a crisp autumn morning, Emily watched as Ethan and Daniel played catch in the park, their laughter filling the air. She realized how far she had come from the heartbreak of her past to the hope of her future. Life wasn't perfect, but it was hers, filled with love, resilience, and new beginnings. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily whispered a silent thank you to the universe. Sometimes, life's unexpected turns lead to exactly where you're meant to be. Subscribe to Life Stories for more heartfelt tales of love, resilience, and the strength to overcome life's challenges.